You might catch yourself sliding in and out of a hallucinatory state after just relax and enjoy it. Just relax and enjoy it.
This is an experiment in mind formation. Information. Forming, controlling, operating your mind and your brain. Using digital techniques to overload, scramble, confuse, unfocus your mind. The natural state of the brain is chaos. Chaos is beautiful.
So, Catherine Llewellyn, how are you?
I'm very well. I've got through to the end of the week. It's Friday afternoon here, and I've actually had quite a good week. So I'm feeling quite pleased with myself and quite relaxed. Although guaranteed something will go horribly wrong that I'm not expecting. But at the moment, I'm feeling relaxed, and I'm really intrigued to come on your podcast. It looks like a really interesting podcast.
It's something else for sure.
Yeah.
So tell me a little bit about yourself.
Okay, so I hate it when people ask me a question that's as open as that. Yeah. So I'm British. Everyone thinks I'm English, but actually I'm Scots, and most people don't care either way. I work with people who are interested in elevating their level of consciousness, because they figure that if they do that, they will have a better life, more of what they want, and they'll make more of a contribution. And I do that because I believe that that's the next stage of our evolution, to raise the level of consciousness of humanity. I think that's the primary lever for us. So that's what I'm into. Okay. And I love to do conscious dance. I like to work with energy healing techniques. I like to wander around outside in nature. I'm very healthy. I'm very free-spirited. And I'm basically really enjoying life at the moment. I've ratcheted down a bit from when I'm no longer working really, really full on like I was when I was younger. So I'm now in a slightly more mellow phase.
That sounds enjoyable.
Yeah, I am enjoying myself. Yeah.
Yeah. So when you say elevate consciousness, what do you mean?
Well, I think how that kind of manifests is different for each person. Some people have formulas and models and structures and layers and things like that. I don't so much do that. I'm more helping somebody to get a sense of where they are and how that is for them, and explore that in such a way that they can create more freedom, more connectedness to what they're experiencing, more of a release of natural flow of energy. Those sorts of things are the kind of things people are interested in to begin with. Something I do sometimes talk about is this notion of connecting more with our higher self. For some people, that's a useful notion. For some people, the notion of connecting with the fact that we're all one, that unity thing is very helpful. For some people, it's that they're more motivated by that sense of connecting in with universal love and recognizing that as a force or a presence that always exists. So it's very, very variable from person to person. I mean, in myself, it's a question of how truthful can I be in any given moment about what is actually going on with me, and how much responsibility can I take for that, and how can I notice when my ego starts to come in and take over, and how can I let go of that. So it's things like that and variations on those sorts of notions. But consciousness is such a multifaceted thing.
Right.
You know, I mean, I haven't even mentioned the subconscious,
Right.
you know, which is another whole area of exploration. You know, for some people, elevating their level of consciousness is about opening up to the messages they're getting from their subconscious and learning how to understand those. So it's a massive, massive question. And I think the question is a lifelong question. You know, what is consciousness? What is elevated consciousness? I could keep talking for the rest of 2 hours just from that one question.
Right.
But I will have mercy on you and I won't.
So how did you get into this type of work?
Well, I think it probably started right back in my childhood. I mean, my parents were very alternative people. They would have thought of themselves as bohemian. This was in the 1950s in rural England. It was considered to be really bizarre and you know, dangerous to be like that. But my father in particular would start to talk to us about all sorts of esoteric notions and philosophical notions when we were 5. You know, so right from the beginning, I was sort of being introduced to that. Alongside that, I kind of went in and out of staying curious about that and sort of in and out of who am I as a person? How do I survive? Oh my God, puberty, you know, all the different things that we go through in life. And I kind of went back and forth between following curiosity about truth and spirit and all that sort of thing and exploring what it is to be manifest on the planet as an individual person with a body and a heart and everything else. You know, and at different times in my life, I was more or less obsessed with one or the other. And in terms of how it turned into work, I was very lucky. I ended up being able to be paid for what I love to do. I think that probably started when I was in my early 20s. And I did an enlightenment intensive program, which was called Exegesis, which at the time was very similar to EST, which was the forerunner of what is now the Landmark Forum. And back in the day, that was a very sort of shocking shake-up experience where, you know, I really faced up to things like ego and conditioning and being driven by my emotions and my survival conditioning and all of that. And that's when I really started to connect with the work, you know, the work of growing and learning in that capacity. And it wasn't very long after that some of us who'd done that weekend got together and started working together because we said, look, we've come out of that experience really connected to what really matters to us. And then we've gone back to work. And, you know, we're doing stuff we don't believe in. We're working for organizations we don't believe in what the organization's about. So can we think of a way that we can work together and try and put some of these principles into practice?
Right.
So we started doing that. And quite quickly, I started being a trainer in that organization. And I was training people in connecting their voice with their heart, you know, so going beyond where their voice is just a sort of very dilute version of what is within them that wants to be communicated, to try to sort of shorten that gap between what was inside the spirit and what was coming out in the voice. And I had no idea what I was doing. You know, I was kind of making it up. I was picking up stuff here and there. It was very somatic. There were people crying. There were people running out of the room and saying, get away from me. You know, there were people transforming. It was and I was 24? You know, and so that was my first work that was, you know, it was spiritual work, although it was ostensibly just about the voice. And it kind of evolved from there over the next 43 years, you know, and went into all sorts of other areas to do with leadership, organizational change, personal growth, spiritual expansion, you know, all these different areas of what it is to be a human and to really manifest and experience life and really show up.
That's a good answer. Yeah. Yeah. So You seem pretty called to this work as you said, from an early age. Like your father was kind of influencing you towards some of these esoteric ideas, and that's essentially what led you here. So, what keeps you passionate about this work?
I think for me, being passionate about this work is a default. It's not.
Right.
There's never any sense of having to motivate myself. The thing is, every time I work with somebody, and actually sometimes just with friends or people I haven't worked with, when something happens and there's a transformation, no matter how small or how great, to me, that's just magical. It's just a magical thing. There's no better game in town, right? It's just a fantastic thing. It just makes me very, very happy.
Right.
And I really enjoy it. I also really enjoy the sort of letting go of self that happens when I'm doing the work. The sort of, I've got a little crib sheet for when I'm running group workshops. And the little crib sheet says things like, I am not responsible for the results of this event. I am not responsible for how people are going to feel. I'm responsible for showing up, holding the vision of what it is we've said we want, and remaining true to that, and then serving the well-being and the growth of the people in the group. So it's a service experience.
Yeah, no, I definitely get that. I'm very large into service work myself. So I have a question, and it's kind of it may be a difficult one to answer, because I feel like it might be a little all over the place in the sense that I was going to ask, so how would you go about, you were talking about letting go of the self, and I feel like this is going to be something that's going to be slightly different for everyone. Everyone's going to have a different way that you point to that for them. But if you say you were working with a new client, how would you go about not influencing, but kind of relating these ideas and getting someone to wake up to this idea of no self?
Well, it depends on if they want to do that, right, to begin with. I mean, when I first talked to a new...
I mean, I would imagine that somebody wouldn't come to you with that question unless they were interested in doing that, right? So
yeah, but they might not come with that question. So the thing is, when I first talked to someone who's thinking about working with me, the first conversation is very, very open, and it could be that the direction of the work to begin with could be one of a million things. So very often something like letting go of the self, very often that's something that emerges as part of the path towards something that they want. So it's not often that someone will come and say, I'm here with you because I want to let go of the self.
Right.
That's not very often what they will say. Because bear in mind, to work with me, they've got a lot of time into it. It's hard work, it's work doing it, and it costs money. So generally when people come and do it, it's because they've got some sort of more tangible thing that they know that they want. But often the best way to get to that tangible thing would include possibly something like letting go of the self.
Right.
Because, of course, letting go of the self is absolutely crucial if somebody wants to open themselves up to be receptive to the power of the universe, if you like. In order to receive all the gifts and the blessings of what is being offered to us all of the time, we have to let go of our kind of limited set of agendas, because that limited set of agendas forms a barrier in a way to that coming towards us. Now, that sort of, as I've just described that to you, someone who's worked with me might not talk about it in those terms at all.
Yeah.
But they might talk about it in terms of something like, I suddenly realized there were a lot more opportunities around me than I'd realized. Or I suddenly realized I had a lot more imagination than I thought I had. Or that I was more intuitive than I realized. Or that there were more people who loved and supported me than I realized. Or I had some fantastic people in my circle I'd never thought of, So people won't always go straight to the esoteric way of describing it.
Right.
So part of my job really is there's a word called code. I did a piece of work years ago. I had my profile done. It was called a thinking intentions profile. And one of my very strong thinking processes was a thing called code, which is basically about translating things in such a way that people can understand them, or in such a way that they are accessible to people. And I'm apparently very strong in that. I'm not quite sure where that came from. But what it means is, people will work with me, and the idea of letting go of the self may never be said in that way.
Right. Yeah. I find that the language is like one of the biggest barriers that we have. I find that for many people that I talk to in the work that I do and over this podcast and just in various areas, it's a lot of times I'll talk to people who were saying the exact same thing. We just have different terminology. And then it's just trying to decode what each other is saying. And once we can reach a middle ground, then things sort of open up.
Yes. But I feel it's my job to go further towards the other person than the middle ground. I feel it's my responsibility to do that.
Well, yeah.
Because also they're also saying something, aren't they? They're saying something. They are find a way to express that. So I feel my job is mostly that kind of listening mode of how receptive can I be to actually understanding what it is that this soul in front of me is calling for, and how can I respond to that and help them to find that. And so that's part of what, for me, letting go of the self is about, me letting go of terminology and a particular path, et cetera, and fully being present with, what they are trying to communicate to me.
Right. So when you meet with a new client, how do you initially get started with someone? What would be the first question you ask them generally?
Why did you want to talk to me? It's always the first question. Right.
That's a good place to start.
You'd be amazed how long that conversation can be just from that one question. So
do you find that a lot of times people have the same reasons for approaching you? I mean, I know it's going to vary across the board, but do you see a lot of similarities in some of these clients?
I would say a very common answer is, Catherine, I'm not really sure why I wanted to talk to you. But I just heard you on a podcast and there was something about your energy. I just had this idea that it just felt like I ought to talk to you. That's very common. Another common reason is where somebody will say, someone I really know and trust has worked with you and their life has really, really transformed. And I've just got a feeling that maybe, but I suppose in general, these are people who've got this sort of feeling that there's something just around the corner for them. They can't necessarily quite name it. They always have tangible things that they know what they want in their lives, but on another level, they often have this kind of sense that there's some greater meaning, some greater fulfillment, some greater manifestation of their grand self, as that's a term someone used the other day that I love, their grand self. And they just got this feeling I might be someone they can trust and he might be able to help them to do that. It's often very tentative in the first conversation.
That makes sense. So I noticed that you recommend working with the mind, body, feelings, and action. And can you describe what you mean by that?
Yes. Well, we are an entity. Each person is an entity that consists of many parts. And one of the things we've done in our culture is to sort of break that down so we can analyze it and try and understand it, which there's nothing wrong with that. But the trouble with that is people can then overemphasize one aspect and the other aspects kind of starve as a result. And I think most adults would probably acknowledge that they reach adulthood a bit kind of lopsided, in the sense that someone might be very, very well developed in terms of emotional expression, let's say, but not very good at organizing themselves. Or someone might be really good at pushing and driving forwards, but find empathy escapes them, difficult for them. Most of us think when we get to adulthood, we don't have everything sort of on a level. And so that means we need to, of course, we're going to pay attention to the area that we always pay attention to. And in fact, that's a really good way to get quick short-term results, isn't it? Because that's how to do that in that area. But when these other areas are also worked on, not only do those other areas come into play and start making a contribution, but the original area also flourishes more fully. Because, of course, all these areas feed one another.
Right.
So, for example, let's say somebody looks after their health in terms of nutrition. Immediately, they can think more clearly, they can sleep better, they drop some weight, they probably become emotionally better balanced. Fantastic. If you then add in something like conscious dance, for example, then they're working with energy. They've got more energy flowing through them. They're processing things at a deeper level. They are expressing themselves much more fully. If you then add in doing some energy meditation work, yoga nidra, something like that, they then start going into those layers of the subconscious and the soul, and they get a kind of a calmness and a stillness. Added to those other things, they then have more energy for the exercise. They process their food even better because their body is functioning better because everything's more balanced, more tuned. And if they also work in the realm of their mind and their intellect, what they then find is that they've got these extraordinary insights. They can put things together. They can, if you like, play chess in their mind with all of the concepts and the events and the experiences that are going on in their lives. So all these things feed one another. And the result is that somebody has a much more vivid experience of life. They feel much more capable. They feel more energized. They find themselves more interesting, and they find life more interesting, and they're more flexible. So life becomes much more of an adventure, an interesting, enjoyable, fulfilling adventure. And they're dependent on external things such as money, fame, status, all those kinds of things. They become less dependent on those things because they're finding a core place of oneness with themselves. That's just a fantastic experience. Right. And to me, that's an ultimate freedom. That's ultimate freedom.
I was just about to say that's the ultimate goal, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So, could you describe? You said conscious dance. I'm not familiar with that term. Could you enlighten me on that?
Of course. Well, have you heard of ecstatic dance?
I have heard of ecstatic dance.
Okay, so some people use the terms,
Okay, I kind of thought that might have been what you were talking about, but I wasn't 100%. I was like, is this something new that I'm not aware of?
No. Well, the people who call it conscious dance will sometimes say, well, ecstatic dance is just all about getting high, as in, high off yourself.
Right.
Right. And conscious dance is more about, meaning and stuff like that. You get these kind of snobbish hierarchies in absolutely every single modality on the planet. So some people say, oh no, ecstatic dance, terrible. And I'm going, oh no, conscious dance, wishy-washy. It doesn't matter. They're basically the same thing.
Right.
And I got a definition I had a neighbor when I was living in Somerset. He was a rock musician when he was younger, and he looks like one still now, And he said, what's conscious dance? And I told him what it was. And he went, so what you're saying is you can dance yourself into oblivion, or you can dance yourself into awareness. I said, that's exactly right.
I like that. That actually kind of answers what was going to be my next question.
It's so good, isn't it? Thank you, Jim.
So you said you briefly mentioned like manifestation, and I've that's kind of a weird one for me. Like that's one of those terms that I'm kind of, I don't know. I have mixed feelings about manifestation, and obviously it does work, right? Like we've seen it work I've seen it work in people. I've had it work with myself, but it's still, even having seen it work within my own life, I'm still a little like shy of that term. I don't know why that is. I don't know why that is. I think that's because it's one of those terms that gets thrown around by a lot of people now, and more people than I'm probably comfortable hearing that word from, I think. And
I understand exactly what you mean.
And I don't feel like they really understand what they're talking about most of the time when they're using that term. I feel like it's something that they've heard, and now that they use it in conversation, kind of in the same way that pop psychology terms get used now, right? Like people throw around the word narcissist all the time, and
I know.
and likely they've never really had to deal with an honest to God narcissist. They just don't understand what they're talking about. So when we're talking about manifestation, could you describe what you feel the definition of that is?
Well, when I use the term manifest, I'm simply talking about where something takes place in physical form, where something actually occurs.
Right.
So I am currently manifesting as a woman. This is my current manifestation.
Right.
A British woman living in Wales in the UK. Right. This is my current manifestation.
Right.
And I could say as well that sitting talking to you is a manifestation, because I had an idea a couple of years ago that I wanted to go onto other people's podcasts.
Right.
And that's now happening. And it didn't happen to begin with. And I had to work quite hard to get to the point where it started happening. So
that part, see, and that's the part that people often leave out, I think, is the work, right? Yeah. We hear the word manifestation all the time. And I think that a lot of people just, they have a mixed idea of what that is, because they seem to think that there's no work required.
There's there's something I call the I'm owed mentality. Which it otherwise known as the little prince, little princess mentality, which says, I deserve to be given everything I want without actually doing anything for it. And that mentality doesn't matter what words you use, whether you use the word manifestation, prayer, positive thinking. The I mode mentality just doesn't work.
Right.
Because the universe doesn't care. The universe is not impressed by the fact that you're so fabulous and you deserve something. It's like, how's that working for you? Doesn't really work. Unless that person finds a sponsor who could, with a massive amount of money, who gives them everything they want.
Right. Yeah.
And some people actually do that.
Yeah. I mean, they're out there.
Yeah. To some cost, frankly.
Yeah.
I met a woman once who was the mistress of a very wealthy man. And her, she had a house in Oxford. She had a flat in Paris. All her expenses were covered. She had fabulous clothes. She looked great, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And she was absolutely miserable.
Yeah. I was waiting for it. I knew there was going to be a big hairy butt in there somewhere, but she was,
and she couldn't walk away from it. She couldn't walk away, because she had no sense of her own ability to create what she wanted in her life.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I've met several people like that myself. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's tragic, right? Like it's always tragic seeing somebody in that case, because then they're tethered by their own desires for, security and comfort. And I find that if you really want to, and I can only speak from my own experience, but if you really want growth and you really want, your life to change, it takes some effort, and it takes some work, and it takes stepping out of the comfort zone. It takes being completely uncomfortable.
Yeah, it often can do. Yes. And how we respond to discomfort as well is very important. I was writing in my journal the other day, and I found myself writing about this idea that there's such a thing as experiencing difficulty in life. And then there's such a thing as having a difficulty about the difficulty.
Right. Yeah.
Having a drama about the crisis.
Yeah. That's what in my practice, that's what we call taking the second arrow, right? So, you say you're walking through the woods and you were to get shot by an arrow, and then everything, the stories that you create around that are the second arrow. Like, oh, why would this happen to me? Who's out here shooting arrows right now?
Yeah. Oh, that's good. I like that. Yeah. The second arrow.
So what does your personal practice look like? What is it? So walk me through an average day.
Okay, so I wake up in the morning. Mm-hmm. I usually have something like 9 hours sleep.
That's good.
Which really serves me. Wake up in the morning. I usually sit up and look out of the window for a bit. I've got a beautiful view across the hills, so I just kind of get a sense of the hills. But I come downstairs. At the moment, I've got a cat I've just rescued.
Nice.
So he is in a separate room to the other cats. So the first thing, I come downstairs, turn on the lights, open the curtains. Then I come up and feed this cat and give him a little bit of love. Come back down, make breakfast, feed the other cats, sit down with my breakfast with a candle, looking out over the view, and read a book. Usually some sort of very nourishing fictional book. At the moment, I'm reading Ursula Le Guin. Do you know her?
I'm not familiar.
Worth looking up. She's an astonishing woman. She writes stories which are ostensibly just, stories, but she's going for the heart the whole time in terms of everything about what it is to be human. So I read my book, and then I write in my journal. And then I stretch my whole body. I've got a whole routine I've developed over the years to stretch everything out. And then I go and start to work. And then during the day, at some point, I'll go out for a walk for an hour. In the evening, I relax, have supper, watch a bit of TV, have a bath, go to bed, read my book, and then get plenty of sleep. So that's just a day, when I'm just working at home by myself.
Right.
I also run conscious dance workshops. I run Pellowah attunement workshops. So that's like an energy treatment, attunement training.
Okay.
I run reflection workshops, which help people to reflect as a kind of a gateway into all these things we've been talking about. And of course, I have clients on Zoom. And sometimes I have clients who come to see me, either for mentoring or for treatments. I sometimes give people treatments in person or remotely. And also as part of my whole practice, I'm part of a community of Pellowah teachers and practitioners, and we give each other treatments. So I'll have 1 or 2 or 3 treatments a week.
And could you define that again for me?
Pellowah means radical shift in consciousness.
Okay.
So it's a hands-off energy treatment. And Pellowah is an energy that comes straight from source, direct from source. It contracts with the recipient's consciousness in order to identify what is needed in order for that consciousness to shift significantly, and then delivers whatever it is that is required.
Where does that come from?
Australia.
Okay.
And it was first channeled in 2003, so it's quite recent.
Yeah, interesting. I was because I immediately, my mind goes towards things like Reiki. Is it kind of similar to that in a sense?
Reiki is a much denser energy, and much more focused on the body and the aura, particularly the immediate layers of the aura closer to the body. Pellowah is specifically for the consciousness. Okay, so it's a much finer energy. It's very, very different from Reiki. It does come under the umbrella of energy technique work.
Right. How did you get into doing that?
Well, I had a friend who we both did our Reiki Masters training with the same teacher in the 90s. And we were both very good friends of this teacher. And I loved this other woman. Anyway, she disappeared back to Australia for 15 years, came back. And my friends, I was going to go see my friend for lunch in South Wales. And she said, "Great, Julie is back from Australia. We can have lunch together." I immediately felt there was something about the way she said it where I thought, I think this is going to be more than just a lunch. Anyway, we got together for lunch. I said to Julie, what have you been doing? She said, Pellowah. I said, what's that? She said, radical shift in consciousness. And I said, I want to do it. I mean, instantly.
Right.
I'm very trusting of my immediate response to things like that. So I was on the workshop 10 days later, and then I was a practitioner. And then 4 years after that, I did the teacher training. The founder came over from Australia and did a batch of teacher trainings over here. And since then, this year, I've been running the workshops and training other practitioners.
Very, very cool. Very, very nice. Yeah, I'd never heard of that before. That's a completely new concept for me. But there's very few people doing it in the States. I know a few people doing it in the States. And they actually went to Australia to train, some of them, and some of them came over to the UK to train when Katrina was over here. So basically, it started in Australia and was just in Australia until 2018. And then my friend Julie came over and started running workshops in the UK. She's now trained 400 practitioners. She then got the founder over. She arranged the whole thing. And the founder came over and trained 52 teachers in a series of, teacher trainings over a period of time. So there are now 52, 53 teachers in the UK. So the question, everyone's now saying, Julie, are you going to go to the States and do the same thing over there? And she's saying, can I just have a rest first? So I don't know. I suspect it will happen in the States, but I don't know who's going to be the person who does that. Right. Yeah, that's interesting. That's the stuff like that just fascinates me, especially if it's specifically geared towards consciousness. So that's how does that even work? Could you?
I don't fully understand it myself.
Could you like describe describe a session for me, like just give me an overall view of like how you would even go about doing that? Is it similar to Reiki in that sense that it's work with the hands, or is it just projected energy? Like I'm trying to picture the way this works.
Okay, so with Reiki, because as I said, I'm a Reiki master as well. With Reiki, the practitioner is actually reading the person's body,
right.
And they are choosing where to place their hands on the person's body in order to encourage the energy in that person's body to do what it needs to do. In Pellowah, what's happening is, first of all, you don't touch the client in Pellowah. What happens is the facilitator opens up the space, calls in the Pellowah energy, and then the Pellowah then takes over. So the Pellowah energy then directs the practitioner to move in whatever way. And so the practitioner has no idea where the Pellowah is going to guide them to move, or why, or what it's doing, because they are not reading the client. Even if the client's in the room, you can't read the client when you're doing Pellowah.
Okay.
Because the Pellowah energy and the client's consciousness having a direct, private conversation, which the practitioner cannot read, has no access to. So when you do Reiki, you can actually feel the Reiki energy when you're giving the treatment.
Right.
With Pellowah, you cannot feel what the client's feeling. So you have this thing of getting past the self, letting go of the self, is particularly relevant with Pellowah, because the ego has no place in it. It just has no place. The practitioner is not the star of the show. The practitioner is a puppet for it. And even at the end of it, the client does not have to disclose what they experienced. The practitioner will say, look, if you feel you would like to share, you're really welcome to do so, but there's no obligation to do so. And if the client does share, the practitioner does not get to interpret it or comment on it or anything. You don't get to mess with the experience, essentially. it's a very hands-off thing on the part of the practitioner. It's quite a challenge to a lot of Pellowah practitioners when they start, because if people are used to giving treatments where they are really part of the whole thing, and they're giving insights and thinking, yes, I saw a symbol at this point. I felt like your heart was doing this, etc., which can be fantastic in a lot of instances. But in Pellowah, that's not what you're doing. And as the recipient, you might lie down, and an hour later, you might feel like it's only been 2 minutes and nothing's happened. Or you might just fall asleep. Right. Or you might feel like you've been on a trip for like 5 hours. You might see lights and colors and all kinds of stuff. You might hear voices. You might have all sorts of insights. You might have an experience of clearing, deep clearing. I've had occasions when I've come out of a treatment, when during the treatment, I felt like I was kind of almost in trance. And sometimes I've come out and I feel like I've had like an intense consciousness workout, but I do not know what happened. I just feel like I've had an intense workout, right? But I don't know what it was.
Right.
And I don't need to know. And other times I come out and I've got utter clarity. It's because it's about the consciousness, that the experience of it and the result, it is infinite in its variety.
So, I want to talk to you about consciousness for a minute, and my question is, what is your view of consciousness? Because that's one of the things, even with all the advances that we have in medical technology and science and in spiritual movements and across the board, we still don't know necessarily where consciousness arises from, right? So, there's the idea that consciousness is created within the brain. Obviously, that's just one of many ideas about consciousness. There's the idea that there is the collective conscience and that we are all of one conscious. And so what is your view on that? Do you think that if we are just, say, manifestations, we are all just a manifestation of source experiencing itself subjectively, or do you feel that consciousness is nothing more than a biomechanical process?
I do not think that consciousness is nothing more than a biomechanical process. And it doesn't feel like that to me either.
Right.
It feels very different. I don't feel like I exist inside my skull. That doesn't feel real to me.
Right.
I feel like I exist. The scope of where I exist alters depending on my state at any point in time. So sometimes I feel like my consciousness is way out beyond the stars. Sometimes I feel my consciousness is very much in my body. Sometimes I feel it's with someone else or with a group of people or with a space or with whatever, it's highly variable. So to me, consciousness is absolutely not bounded by the brain. Absolutely not.
Good. I like that answer. That's a good answer for sure. Yeah, I feel very much the same way. I don't feel like it's, but I feel like society in general, most people do live kind of up here, right? Like they don't, I have an exercise that I do with people sometime, and I'll ask them to point to themselves. And yes. It's astounding how many people always point right here. And I'm like, oh, are you sure about that? Right. Are you sure? Are you really sure?
Have you come across the headlessness work?
No. Could you describe that for me?
Yes. So Douglas Harding developed what he called headlessness, otherwise known as on having no head. And you reminded me of it because one of the exercises in that is where you take your finger and you point at your face. And then you say to yourself, what are you pointing at?
Right.
And the answer, of course, is nothing, because you can't see your own face. You can't see your own head.
Right.
So when you point at, when this exercise is done in the right context, it blows your mind. I mean, I first did these exercises when I did the Enlightenment Exegesis program. We did a whole series of headlessness exercises. And there was this extraordinary experience of, oh my God, I am not a head on top of a body. I'm a sort of infinite space, which is witnessing this, what's in front of me. So I can move my hand in front of my face, let's say, so I can actually see my hand. And I can see my elbow, but I can't see my head. So it's almost like I'm this infinite sort of window,
right?
Looking into reality.
Like just conscious awareness, basically.
Conscious awareness, yes. And actually, the Douglas Harding has now passed on, and the banner's been taken up by a chap called Richard Lang. And he came on my podcast as a guest. And he does the most beautiful description, because he's been working with headlessness for decades and decades, you know. Right. And it is actually, we were talking about letting go of the self. This is another way of letting go of the self, letting go of the idea of the limited self. Right.
Yeah, I do a lot of self-inquiry work with that. And, you know, just basically looking at I'd say the body, the mind, and just running through everything and you know, not this, not that. Like because I can be, you know, I have a body, but I am not the body. I have a mind. I am not the mind. You know, it's interesting because, you know, we use the term, I think you used the term, the witness, I believe is one that you used, but even the witness can be witnessed. So turn awareness back on awareness. You know, we can be aware of our own awareness. So at the end, it's just emptiness.
Yes. Beautiful. I think that's very, very wonderful work, because that's what the open space, it opens space for us to arrive in the truth of the moment.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So, and again, we get back to the whole language thing. It's like, and I run into this all the time. It's like we're kind of talking about the same concepts, but we all just have a little slightly different terminology. And it's like, and that's one of the biggest hangups that I have with any kind of work of this nature is like how to convey these ideas to somebody who may or may not already be aware of some of these concepts, but then taking them from the conceptual into the experiential, and then trying to convey these ideas. That's always the biggest hang up for me, is because oftentimes I'll find that I have a conversation with somebody and we're saying the same thing, but we just have a different way of saying it.
Oh, well, I think perhaps because I was trained as a humanistic psychologist, and one of the things we do in humanistic psychology is you do the experiential bit first, and then you do the theoretical after. So for me, I was already doing that before I discovered that it was actually called humanistic psychology and went and trained in it. But for me, that works better, because then when they come to the theory, they're just making sense of an experience they've already had. Right.
Yeah, I can see how that would actually be very beneficial. And I think a lot of times too, because we can get wrapped up in the concepts, right? We can get ourselves wrapped up in the concepts and then use the conceptual idea of something as sort of a marker or to you know, I have achieved this, or rather than saying then having the experience and then saying, well, what the hell was that? And then trying to figure that out. Right.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And but I think there's a place, of course, for starting with the framework, theoretical framework. For some people, that's what they need before they feel ready to then move into the experiential. So.
Yeah. I mean, I guess it depends on the person, right? Yeah. Depends on the person, depends on where they're at. You said you have a podcast. What's the name of the podcast?
Truth and Transcendence.
How long have you been doing that?
2.5 years, nearly. July, August, September, October. 2 years and 3 months.
Very cool. What got you? What was the impetus behind that? Just always, did you ever want to do a podcast and we're like, now's the time, or what set that ball rolling?
I actually resisted doing a podcast for years. People kept saying, do a podcast. You've got a great voice, do a podcast. And I'm like, you do a podcast. You know, it sounds like a lot of work for no money, right? Why do I have to do a podcast? And all my life, I've been surrounded by people who've got great ideas of what I should be doing.
Right.
Thanks, guys.
Starting with my parents and then moving on.
Yeah, exactly. Well, actually, my parents didn't do that, interestingly.
Oh, that's fantastic.
No, they were just awesome in that regard. But
that's great.
I'm very grateful for them. But at the time, it was the middle of 2021, and I was so fed up with the lockdowns. And,
right.
Over here, I was kind of forbidden by law to see my clients. And up till then, I'd only ever seen clients in person. I was so fed up and bored. And I thought, I've just got to do something. I've just got to get my voice out. I've got to somehow, and I thought, oh, God, it means I better do a podcast. Right. And it was one of those things, oh, no, it's time to do a podcast.
It's like, oh, man, here we are. I guess
God.
It's time. It's funny.
And I started doing it. I was incredibly nervous to begin with.
Oh, no, I totally understand. Same. When I first started doing this podcast, I was just a bundle of nerves.
How long have you been doing yours?
About a year longer than you have. I started this one in also during lockdown, during the pandemic. And I feel like a lot of podcasts were probably started during the pandemic. Probably more podcasts were started between 2020 and 2021 than have ever been started in the history of podcasting.
I mean, I was probably more resistant than you. You were probably more, open to the message.
I had actually wanted to do the podcast for many years, but I just had life kind of got in the way, and I was going through some personal issues that were kind of preventing me from doing that. But once I was able to traverse my own issues, it was I felt like it was time, and so I started this one in May May of 2020. Yeah.
All right, great, well done.
Yeah. And, it's kind of ebbed and flowed a little bit. Sometimes I'm more active with it than other times. At the beginning, I was very consistent. I would put out an episode every week, sometimes 2 episodes every week. And then I got to a point where it was just like, it got to the point where it was more of a chore than it was enjoyable. And so I kind of took a step back for a little while and then kind of reapproached it in a different way. And now I essentially just I'm kind of back to putting out episodes more frequently, but I'm doing it more on my own terms now rather than what I think I need to do for it to be quote unquote successful, because what even is that, right? What even is success?
Yeah. Whereas for me to keep going with something like this, it's actually easier for me if I've got a particular rhythm for it.
Right.
So I've done one every week all the way through, because for me, that helps me with the momentum, that helps me to sort of turn it into a kind of business as usual process that happens.
Yeah, no, I totally understand that. I've kind of, like I said, I took a break actually from doing interviews for a while. I teach a meditation class here in Pensacola, and I give Dharma talks on various topics related to Buddhist practice. And so I've been posting more of those talks lately than interviews, but I miss doing the interviews because I miss connecting with people such as yourself and having wonderful conversations. So I've moved more back into doing interviews lately, but
I think it's great. I actually do think solo episodes are really valuable as well. I do solo episodes as well.
Really?
Because sometimes people want to actually hear from the host. They want to hear, unmitigated what the host has to say. I think that's really valuable. So,
right. Yeah, and I've never actually just sat down and done a solo episode. Like I said, I've done the talks that I do with the group, but other than that, I've never sat down and just talked into the microphone and done a solo episode. But I've been told that I should. And I think this conversation is kind of pushing me in that direction. I think that might be fun. I think it might be a good idea.
Well, I did 30 of those before I started having it, because that's what I felt able to do to begin with.
Right.
30. Right. It's a really interesting training. Very interesting training.
I'll bet. Yeah. That's a completely different animal for me. And I'm sure that there was a lot of growth experience through those 30 episodes.
100%.
Yeah, for sure. So what are your plans for the future? Just keep teaching consciousness work and keep doing
Yes.
that?
So I actually just recently sort of rebranded myself and made a new website and stuff. So, because I was doing all sorts of different things, they were all over the place. So I've pulled it all together in the last few months.
That's helpful.
So, I've got a goodly period of time of kind of bedding that in over the next period and just seeing where it goes. My sense, because what happens with me is that every few years, I get a sense that it's time to sort of, reintegrate, where there's part of what I'm doing that kind of falls away and another part that sort of accelerates and some things that merge together and some things that become distinct, So I've got, programs and workshops and so forth and that I'm doing at the moment that work really well that I'm very happy with at the moment. Mm. But I fully anticipate, and the podcast, of course, but I fully anticipate over the years that how that looks will evolve again. I mean, I'm 67 now. I probably will, I don't see myself stopping working until I sort of can't. So let's say I'm working for another 20 years, let's say, which would be pretty good. I reckon it could evolve and shift several times during that period.
Oh, yeah.
But the sort of central thread of consciousness has always been there ever since I started working with clients in this way. So in various ways, right back in 1980s.
Right.
It just the way it's dressed up and packaged and everything else has changed over time. So I can't see that changing.
So you said you work with clients both in person and over Zoom. Do you have more in-person clients now or more Zoom clients post pandemic?
More Zoom clients.
Really? Do you find that there's a difference between working with people in person and working via Zoom? Do you find it easier to work with either one or the other?
I would say there are certain things you cannot do on Zoom that you can only do in person, because when you're there in person, your energies are mingling in the room,
right.
And there's a whole dance to it, which is not possible on Zoom, and you're 3-dimensional rather than 2-dimensional. That said, there's an enormous amount that can be done on Zoom, and whether one's easier or more difficult, I don't think I could say that one is easier or more difficult. I suppose what I would say is what I find easy or difficult in any given moment may vary. Mm. Sometimes I'm working with somebody and I find it more challenging than I might on another occasion or with a different person.
Right.
But that's more about what's being challenged in me, really, in that regard. So there's always so many things going on, however I'm working with people.
Right. So is there one that you prefer? I would assume you prefer working with people in person.
I do prefer working in person. Yes.
Yeah. I can imagine. So I do too. I just love the connection that is established when you're sharing that energy, because it's so different, it's just such a different thing. And we can act like it's not, and Zoom is, it's a wonderful tool. It's enabled me to do a lot of interesting things that I wouldn't have been able to do without it. It's enabled me to do this podcast, and it's enabled me to work with clients, that are nowhere close to my geographic location. But at the end of the day, like, I really do prefer just that connection of sitting across from someone, and, you get to watch their little, all of their little micro gestures and their, everything that's going on. And that helps so much, in this kind of.
Yeah. And I can say to somebody, okay, I'd like you to go out in the garden and just lie on the grass. I'd like you just to look at the view for a bit.
Right.
Or we're going to have a lunch break. I'd like you to go for a walk in the hills,
So speaking of lying in the grass and going for a walk in the hills, how important to you is it to be connected with nature?
Absolutely vital.
Yeah. And is that something that you recommend to your clients as well, is to just reconnect with nature? because that's been so beneficial for me as well. Like I try to make a point to do, to go for a walk or just to get outside at least, once a day, sometimes more. But, one of my favorite things to do is to just go and swim in the river. We have a lot of rivers around here, and to just be able to go and submerge myself in the icy cold water of the river is just it's so invigorating, and just so the connection with nature is just so important to me.
Yeah, absolutely. I try not to advise my clients on what to do.
Right. No, I get that.
I try to more have a conversation where they think of things they might try. But actually, I would say most people believe that it would be a good idea for them to have more connection with nature. Most people already have that idea in their mind. So very often it's a question of how can they do that? How can they give themselves space to do that? Yeah. How can they make it possible?
Yeah, no, I get that.
Of course, if they're here, I've had the first time I had in fact, when I moved here, the property was like a mess. I mean, it was ramshackle, run down. But I was in the middle of doing a Reiki master's program with somebody, and she did the first section of it. It was like over a 6-month period. She did the first 4 months of it with me when I was in Somerset, and then I moved house. So she had to come here for the last couple of months. I said, look, the place is a mess. She said, Catherine, I don't care. It'll be fine. So my brother came and helped me. I said, right, we've got to make the living room such that someone can sit in the living room, right? There's naked plaster. There's, just make it so someone can sit in the living room and they're not going to electrocute themselves on a live wire or something.
Right.
They've got to be able to get up the stairs, and the guest bathroom has got to be okay, right? And I had her come in the gate, down the path into the living room, not through the lobby or the kitchen, which was a mess, Anyway, when she arrived at the house and she parked, she was in a state of bliss before she walked in the house because of the countryside she'd just driven through. She was already in a state of bliss. She said, oh my gosh. She said she was driving along. Oh, this is lovely. And then she turned the corner and she went, oh my God, look at this. And if you imagine, it's like rolling hills going off endlessly.
Oh, it sounds amazing.
Valleys, just beautiful. And so she came in. And so some of the work had already been done, just by her coming here.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah. And especially these days, right? With cell phones and social media, I feel like people are just so disconnected from that, right? Like, and that's one of the reasons I personally, I got rid of my social media about like a month ago, and I've done it several times where I would get rid of it for a while and then I would get back on it. And mostly I use it for business purposes, to promote the meditation group that I do and to promote, various other things and the podcast and so, some of my own one-on-one stuff that I do, but I don't like it. I really I have an aversion to social media. So I got back off of it again, and I've been off of it for about a month now. And just, my life, it's interesting watching my life improve over the course of a month by just eliminating that one thing.
Yeah. It's interesting because some people find that being involved with social media is really detrimental for them. And some people find that they can actually manage it and use social media and have it not be detrimental. And then, of course, there's people that go back and forth with that. So it's a very, very interesting thing. My theory about this is that we that we are infants learning how to interact with all this technology. We don't know how to interact with it properly,
right? Which
is why we suffer around it. If we knew how to use it, it's like alcohol, for example. Alcohol exists, but it's not true that everybody is walking around in an alcoholic haze the whole time. It's not true, because we've learned how to, and most of us have learned how to use alcohol responsibly.
Right.
We haven't learned that yet with social media.
Yeah, that's true. That's a very good point. Yeah. Much like alcohol, I just decided my life would be better without social media. Alcohol was one of those things that didn't agree with me. Yeah.
Yeah. I kind of broke up with alcohol quite a few years ago as well, without even really noticing.
Yeah. Yeah. Same. Oh, I noticed. It was a conscious decision for me. Like, this is not good for me, and it ultimately has caused me a lot of trouble in my past. So,
Right.
one of those things I had to just kind of put down and move on. And I mean, actually, I don't know if you read my bio or not, but I'm a recovering heroin addict, and so I've had a lot of experience with addiction, and so
Yes.
anything that I don't do anything anymore. Like. No substances for me other than the nicotine, obviously, but
Right.
nicotine and caffeine, those are the only substances that I really do. And so
Right.
I've tried to take any of those really big dopamine catalysts, anything that's going to cause the dopamine reward system to light up really big. Like I try to stay away from that. So social media was the natural next step in that progression for me, I think.
I completely understand. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And another thing with the social media, and this is something that I've one of my main points of my own practice that I've been working on is the comparing mind. Social media would trigger that in me quite frequently, the comparing mind, and that caused me quite a bit of suffering. So
I would say that's very common. I've noticed that in myself.
Yeah.
Because of course everyone puts up a photo where they look fabulous.
Oh yeah, you only see the highlight
with a really
reel.
good-looking partner, fabulous children.
Yeah. You only see the highlight reel, right? You only see the best parts of their life, the stuff that's curated for their social media, not the ins and outs and the suffering and the flat tires and the arguments and that we all experience, but you just don't see that in other people because that's not what they're posting.
Exactly.
I was always very, very, very open about things like that. I was very open to be like, and that made for an interesting social media experience because I don't post just the good stuff, right? Like when I was on it anyway.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, it's been a very freeing experience. And for anyone listening, I highly recommend you get rid of social media for at least a week. Try it out. See how your life feels after a week of not using it.
Yeah. Or even just a day, it's can be very cleansing.
Yeah. Just a short detox, I think can be so beneficial, for most things, right? Like anything, even the things that are good for us. So I meditate. I'm a meditation instructor. I'm trained to do so. And so I've had a very consistent practice for many years. I would sit an hour in the morning and an hour in the evening. And then for basically about the same time I took a break from social media, I just stopped sitting. I stopped doing a sitting meditation altogether for about a month. And I actually just started sitting again. But for that month, I decided, I've been doing this very consistently every day for years and years and years. I'm going to take a step back. And it's interesting how much growth I experienced in my own life by just stopping the seemingly beneficial act of meditation for a month and then coming back to it. It feels new and fresh again. And it's not that I stopped practicing meditation, because for me, meditation and daily life just aren't separate things, right? It's the way that we present ourselves in the world that is the true meditation. It's the cushion.
That's beautiful, actually, what you just said.
Yeah, the cushion is just the training for the rest of this, and this is where it matters. This is where that awareness and that level of mindfulness and clear comprehension really matters. Is in waking life. Like the cushion's beneficial, but this is the waking life is where the rubber hits the road, so to speak.
Completely. I mean, I have a similar thing with yoga because I go to yoga every week, and then every now and again, there's a couple of weeks with no yoga because she runs it in term time, school term time. And then there's no yoga in the holidays and the half terms. So I'll often come back to yoga after one of these breaks and I might think, God, well, I've lost it all. But actually, I come back and I'm better after the break than I was.
Yeah.
And it's the same for a lot of things. Dance. I dance every fortnight at least, sometimes more than that, conscious dance work. Sometimes there's a break, and then when I come back, I'm more fluid, I'm more present. I think it's something to do with whether or not something has become just a habit, or whether we're still conscious as we're doing it.
I agree.
I think it relates to relationships as well. You know, if you have a conversation with your beloved every day, let's say you live a long way away from each other, you talk to each other every day, it can become a rut. You know, and sometimes a break in that is fantastic, because then you come back and you're conscious again. You're right there again.
Right.
You're not just going through the motions of what you always do.
Yeah. What do they say? Absence makes the heart grow fonder.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's true for anything. It doesn't just have to be your significant other or a person. It can be anything, right? Like the practice, you know, whether it be yoga or meditation. It's because I feel like you're right about that. We do get kind of stuck in it, and it just becomes another thing that we're doing. And when it just becomes another thing, we lose that conscious awareness of why we're doing it and the intention behind it. And it's just, well, I always do this, so I'm just going to continue to do it, rather than really getting any benefit from it. Yeah. So where can people find you at?
Oh, well, I'd really love people to tune into the podcast. So the best place to do that is to go to beingspace.world/#podcast.
Okay. And if somebody wanted to work with you, how can they find you?
Just go to beingspace.world.
Same page. Okay.
Yeah, there's multiple ways to contact me.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to do this, Catherine. I really appreciate it.
Me too. I've had such a lot of fun.
Excellent. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day and enjoy your weekend.
And the same to you, sir.
Absolutely.